from one way into another. And that thing that becomes not usable, they came up with the name entropy. And back then they didn't know how to explain it. Heat flows spontaneously from hot to cold bodies. The opposite never occurs. That's one way to say it. Overall, the energy is the same, but it tends to go from hot to cold and not vice versa. Hot, work. Cold, no work. What you have lost in this transformation, you can't do work anymore with cold once the temperature is lower. So that thing that is lost is the entropy. And entropy was a mystery back then. It's still, to some extent, a mystery today. We have a very simple physical explanation of why the second law. So first of all, the second law of thermodynamics says that entropy can never decrease. Now that's important because all the major laws of physics are equal signs. This is the first one, is not an equal sign. It tells you that entropy can never decrease. Which led to all sorts of speculation about the future of the universe. Some things are irreversible. Newton's physics, reversible. You can always undo what you've done. You can always go back, play the world backwards. And we know that's not possible. Unfortunately, I cannot go back to my childhood, be a child again. And I will die. And, or scrambled eggs, you know. You can scramble the eggs. And at the end, you have the same matter energy, but you will never, you have lost the information of what the eggs looked like. Lump of sugar, you put in a cup of coffee, you can calculate exactly how much sugar there is, but you will never know if the lump of sugar was a cube, a sphere, or whatever. Okay, something is lost. Some things are irreversible, you cannot go back to the original state. Okay, so Boltzmann is the one who explained why that is the case. We don't want to get there. But thermodynamics is based on statistics. Newton's physics was not based on statistics. Oh, I had a slide on electromagnetism. So the big thing about Maxwell explains electromagnetism introducing the concept of field. I already said it. These are questions that look complicated, but actually wonderfully elegant. Yeah, so you go from the Newton's world was made of bodies. Maxwell's world is made of fields. Newton's bodies were interacting via forces. It's a conceptually very simple idea. Maxwell's world is made of fields that interact. So it's a less intuitive way of doing things. And we'll see quantum mechanics and relativity a little later. Now, I left philosophy with Kierkegaard. I said with Kierkegaard, so you have from Descartes to Kant, Hegel, was philosophy of great ideas, you know, very similar to the ancient Greeks, trying to explain the big things that happen in the universe or in our mind, whatever. With Kierkegaard, we went down to ordinary lives. Kierkegaard said, well, ultimately, you have to tell me what my existence is. Okay? So Kierkegaard, by the way, already lived in a world without God, because he was asking questions that traditionally would just answer, well, God put you here, you live your life, if you're a good boy, you go to paradise. And he was asking different kind of questions. That really started a different kind of philosophy that is more about living your life. And so then you have Nietzsche, and Nietzsche, and then eventually the existentialists, the phenomenology, and so on. And Schopenhauer Schopenhauer was still a guy of big ideas. He came after Kant and Hegel. Schopenhauer came up with the idea of the will. Now everything is will. There's will in the universe. There's will in objects. There's will in humans, particularly in us. Will is the thing that drives our actions and so forth. And Nietzsche started from that idea, except it turned it into will to power. The will we humans have, is the will to power. And that led him to some ideas about the fact that we are dominated in the West, where we ended up being dominated by the weak race, and he was looking for the superhuman who would instead restore the will to power to all its glory. So, and he had a lot of, he attacked Christian morality as the morality of the weak, because Christian morality is about being nice to others, and created this, from his point of view, creating mediocrity, and that's something he saw as negative. By the way, I visited his grave. His grave, I think, is a great graffiti. I hope it's still there. It says, "God is dead, Nietzsche," and then there's the other one that says, "Nietzsche is dead, God." Okay, so he wants the new morality and whatever. But so we don't do. Ouch! I was hoping to have more philosophy. The other big, I'll tell you. The other big thing that is happening this time is phenomenology. There's another thing that starts with Kierkegaard indirectly. Kierkegaard objected to the scientific program going on. It was very successful. But that scientific program started with the assumption the subject is separate from the object. Okay? I study a system. I study the system. And they're two separate things. And Kierkegaard was the first one to say that that doesn't work. You are part of that system. Phenomenology is all about that thing. Phenomenology is a critique of science. From the point of view, you cannot separate the subject and object. You are part of the object. If you separate the subject from the object, you are causing a big loss to the human experience. The whole point of being human disintegrates. You are doing something very, very wrong. Okay. Meanwhile, neurology, we are beginning to understand more about the brain. Today we live in the age where there's so much about neuroscience. It really starts back then when we discovered the neuron. The brain contains neurons, some special cells. We understand the power of the cerebral cortex, and the most important idea is actually connectionism. Thorndike and others start realizing what is important is not the neuron. It's not the neuron that is a little, today's terms, computer. It's the connections between the neurons that matter. When you connect many neurons together, then something happens. And it's the connections that decide what happens. It's not the single neuron. So the model of the connectionist model is also born at this time. Which is amazing because they knew virtually nothing of what we know today about the brain. They couldn't see these things. And psychology is born at this time with Wundt, then William James is the big name, one of the most influential thinkers in that age. He came up with so many intuitions, and started from the assumption that, from a very materialistic assumption actually, that if you have a brain, it must have a function. Okay? Every organ in the body ultimately is there to help you survive. If you have a brain, the brain is an organ that helps you survive. So starting from that assumption, then it managed to explain a lot of things. Of course, consciousness was a mystery to him, just like it is today. Why do we have to be conscious about what we do? We could just be like robots and perform functions and survive. And his intuition was that consciousness is not a substance, it's a process. That's where the stream of consciousness expression comes from. Consciousness is something that happens that has a duration. And of course, didn't know anything about modern neuroscience, but he had the intuition that it's not just another object. And again, it predates Thorndike in thinking that the brain is a network of some kind. And he also predated the ideas of long-term and short-term memory. So it was very powerful in founding psychology. His book is titled Psychology, by the way. One big theme of psychology, or early psychology, was actually the subconscious. When I said Schopenhauer believed that there's will drives your actions, will is what is behind the evolution of the universe. What's that will? It's something that you don't control. And then Nietzsche talked about some instinct, eventually the will to power. And then people started talking about things that happen outside your control. And eventually you have a philosophy of the unconscious, which is a book that talks about unconscious. Now, it's not surprising it comes from Germany, because Schopenhauer's influence was colossal. You know, Schopenhauer influenced Nietzsche, Nietzsche influenced later others, and they all came from the same kind of feeling that there are things going on in our mind that we're not aware of. So that, so Wundt, founder of experimental psychology, had a very simple view of things actually. Actions must have a motive. If you do something, there's a reason. And motives are mental states. Something in the mind creates a motive, and then you act. What's a motive? It's a measure of an imbalance. You are thirsty, and there's water up there. That creates a motivation to drink. Then you walk to the refrigerator to get water. Okay? Very simple. So action is an attempt to regenerate balance. Human action is rational. Now, this was good to explain just about everything we do, except dreams. We do dream. And, you know, at that point, it just discounted dreams. People were not really interested in it. Well, you probably know where I'm getting to. One psychologist decided to study dreams. And he actually tried to just apply the same kind of thing. Dreams, now replace actions with dreams. Dreams have a motive. What is the motive of dreams? And he started looking for the motive of dreams. And then once you explain that, everything else follows. You know, if you just find out what the motives are. And his motives were in the subconscious. And once you introduce that idea of the subconscious, you can explain everything. Now, what created the subconscious, in his opinion, was this incredible mess of sexual frustrations and so on. That doesn't hold well today. That's this obsession with the sexual traumas of childhood and so forth. So today Freud is more studied as a case, as a psychological case. Why did he have to come up with those ideas? But from his point of view, a dream is only apparently meaningless. But if you know the motives back then you explain the dreams. Anyway, that long story. How is it done? Okay. That sent, by the way, psychology on a very weird trajectory where they were trying to explain the content of dreams instead of explaining why we dream. And today we live in the age where it's the opposite. Neurologists are not interested in explaining the content, but why we dream. You know, of course, we discovered in a REM, we discovered a lot of things about the brain. We discovered about the long-term memory that gets consolidated during dreaming, and so on and so on. So today, the emphasis is on understanding why we dream, what happens when we dream. And so the other influential psychologist at the time was Jung, who believed that motives are not individual, but in society as a whole, there is an unconscious, but it's shared by everybody. So he was more fascinated by the myths, the legends of the world. And to some extent, it was very right, because I travel around the world and I hear stories that are very similar. So he said there's an unconscious that we all share, and out of that unconscious, then the legends and myths are born. The collective unconscious. Okay. Do I want to do this? I will do it next time. This has an impact on computers. So, anyway, psychology is born, okay? Whichever direction it is, that's another thing that is being born. And it's not surprising that these gentlemen are Austria, Germany. These are German-speaking people. So all that philosophy, your question is philosophy had an influence on ordinary people, business, whatever. No, but it had an influence on a lot of other things, and probably an influence on the birth of psychology. And so then physics, so physics is going through this expansion of Newtonian physics, thermodynamics and electromagnetism. And then somebody measures the speed of light, and the funny thing is it's the same in all directions. If you measure the speed of a train, it depends on which direction it's moving compared with you. The speed of light, it's always the same. That's the most failed experiment ever, was to find the difference in the speed of light depending on the direction. And then, of course, the atom is actually not elementary. There's something inside. And eventually Rutherford explains the atom is a little solar system, actually, which is kind of weird, right? There's something, the nucleus, and then there's particles rotating around it. So physics is discovering there's a whole new world back there. And one of the most amazing discoveries was when Planck was studying the black body. I will not tell you what the black body is, but the black body radiates. And now it was expecting that you change the input and the output changes more or less proportionally. I change this much, I get this much, I get this much, this much. Well, guess what? It was more like this. That's quantum. There was a discrete amount of energy that was emitted, and it would be the same until it doubles. The same until it triples. So he realized, well, the world is funny. Energy is actually exchanged in discrete quantities. And Planck left it there. Then somebody else found out the correspondence between energy and frequency, that eventually through becomes the equal mc square of Albert Einstein. Einstein won a Nobel Prize not for relativity, for explaining the photoelectric phenomenon. And Niels Bohr definitely formalizes Rutherford's idea of the electrons orbiting around the atom. But guess what? The electrons can only be in some orbits. That's not a puzzling thing. This is the nucleus, this is the electron, it's another electron. There's no electrons in between. If you try to force the electron in between, bang, up, bang, but not in between. And today we know it's related to the fact that energy is exchanged by discrete quantities. So that's the beginning of quantum mechanics. There's no founder, and most of the things are named after Planck, the Planck constant, the Planck distance, because it was the first one. But it really took a number of people to develop quantum mechanics. And Louis de Broglie was also influential. By the way, Planck German, Einstein German. De Broglie was also influential because he's the one who eventually decided, okay, some waves behave like particles, some particles behave like waves. You know what? Waves and particles are the same thing. They're just two different ways to talk about nature, which was already in this equation, actually. Energy equals proportional to frequency. So that's quantum mechanics, basically, in a nutshell. And then Heisenberg and Schopenhauer work out the big equations. Instead of Newton's equations, you will have Heisenberg's or Schrodinger's equations, with some very interesting consequences. Let me tell you the consequences first, because I don't want, it's probably in next slides, but it doesn't hurt to briefly discuss. So when Heisenberg and Schrodinger eventually come up with equations of quantum mechanics, putting together all of these intuitions, two things happen. If you look at the Heisenberg's equations, indeterminacy. There's a limit to what you can know. You cannot pinpoint the position and the speed of a particle at the same time. Okay? Some things you can, some things you cannot. So there's a limit to what we can know. It's written in those equations. It's a consequence of what you've seen here. Okay? That's the principle of indeterminacy. There's a limit to what science can know. That's a big thing, philosophically big thing. And if you look at the Schrodinger's equation, it's almost worse, because Schrodinger's equation tells you that there's a linear evolution of the system. Unfortunately, that system is a wave. So what does that mean? That there's a wave representing me. You have to be really small to have a wave. Especially since when I look at the electron, I see the electron in a place. I see a little thing right there. But Schrodinger's equation is a wave. Eventually, they figure out that wave is a wave of probabilities. It tells you the probability that the electron is here, 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 when it is measured. And the way it is interpreted at the time is the electron is here, 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 here at the same time. Okay? Because each of these states is perfectly valid. The electron is here, and here, and here, and here, and here. And you have a probability of measuring it here, a probability of measuring it here, and that's what Schrodinger's equation describes, and it works. Whenever we do a measurement to this day, there's no exceptions, it's consistent. Schrodinger said it's going to be here, here, or here, and that's where you measure it. And if you do it 100 times, you get those probabilities. But the weird thing is when you look, it's in one place. So Schrodinger is even weirder, because there's an equation that says how things move, but when you look, you cause the collapse of this wave to one particle. And then Schrodinger restarts with a wave. Okay? So mind-boggling. That's the way it is. That's, as far as we know, that's the way it works. At the same time, another German gentleman, Einstein, in 1905 he wrote 3 papers. Each of those papers changed the history of science forever. And one was the one about special relativity, which Planck, when he read the draft, told him, don't publish it, because if you publish it, nobody will ever believe you. And what he did actually just put together things that they knew. Like they knew the speed of light is a constant. Pointless to keep trying to find out exceptions, you know. Speed of light, it's a universal constant. And he believed strongly in Galileo's relativity, that if you're moving in uniform linear motion, the laws of physics should be exactly the same. And in some other postulates, and just put them together and work out the math. And people had already done that, like the Lorentz transformation, named after Lorentz because he's the first one who found out what today we know is the dilation of time and the contraction of the distances. But the ones who saw those equations always thought that's an optical illusion. It says something. Einstein took it literally. No, 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 no. If you are moving, distances are shorter, period. That's the way it is. And that has implications because reality depends on the observer. That's why relativity. So you cannot say now because the time depends on whether you're moving or not. If you're moving relative to me, your now could be not now for me. Your simultaneous events are not simultaneous for me. And it's not just an optical illusion. This is the way it is. So he took things literally, and so he came up with all the consequences of relativity, which was really weird. One being space and time are not absolute. Each of us has its own space and time, and that's totally different from what Newton said. And of course, all of these formulas have the square root of 1 minus v squared c squared. That means that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Every 2 or 3 years, there's somebody who announces, I found something